Hey, welcome back to episode 14 of the Mass Business Podcast. My name is Matt Ward, and I am your host. I got a good friend today to interview on the podcast. His name is Mark Ridley. He's with GreenShootsFX. GreenShootsFX helps importers pay less U.S. dollars to their global vendors, as well as assisting exporters to collect more U.S. dollars on international sales. They're very big into educating people on best practices and often see importers being invoiced in US dollars, which often means that they are overpaying for those raw materials and goods. They love educating people on the reasons why and how to lower the payment. He's based in Scituate, Mass, but originally from London, migrated here in 2015, and his favorite football team, of course, that's European football team, is the Tottenham Hotspur. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming my good friend Mark Ridley to the podcast. Are you ready? Let's go.
High five the world. I'm feeling all right. High five the world. Yeah.
Welcome to the Mass Business Podcast, where small business owners, also known as risk takers, share their stories about the growth of their business and themselves. Our interviews and our content is focused on growing a small business and understanding networking and referrals. I say it all the time, and I'll say it again today. You never know where your next referral will come from. Hey, there we go. That's my good friend Kelty Kelly. Thanks for that intro song. Appreciate it. Welcome to the show, Mark Ridley.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you having me. What an introduction. That's the kind of introduction I want every time I'm just entering into a room or into a store, quite frankly. I'd love to.
Well, I'm happy to record one for you that you can just play right on your phone for a nominal charge. Probably like, I don't know, a large Dunkin' Donuts coffee would work for me.
Hey, you know, I could probably stretch to that, to be honest with you.
It might be a stretch, and we have to do it in international foreign exchange currency or something too, right? Awesome. So thanks for joining me on the podcast. Just in a real quick, short synopsis, 30 seconds or less, explain to our listening audience, all two people that are probably listening, what exactly GreenShootsFX does.
I'll give it a go, and I'll be honest with you. When my dad still says to me today, I don't know what you do for a living. And so, you know, having moved in financial circles, we can talk to each other in acronyms and, you know, we understand each other. But when it comes to like breaking it down so I can explain to my dad, I'm like, you know what, I think we're gonna have to get stick figures out and like draw a bit of a flow and help him that way. Bless him, love him.
And Mark, will those stick figures go on the back of your minivan too?
I have some thoughts about those kinds of stickers.
All right, what do you do? Explain to the audience what you do.
All right, so I think you nailed it, really. I mean, we do help importers. In fact, I should be very careful and say, like, not necessarily like an out-and-out true importer, because you could be a manufacturer here in the US. You might source your widgets, your raw materials from the US. You might be selling exclusively to the US. But the machine that you have that manufactures those widgets, you might have bought that from Italy, for example, and that might be something you do once every 5 years or so. So you're not really an importer, but you have a global vendor that you pay once in a while. But for keeping it simplistically, or for simplicity's sake, we help anybody that imports goods, services, raw materials pay less for those items, usually compared to using a bank. And I'll caveat that by saying we're not bank bashers in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, you get a lot of your clients from banks, right?
Yeah, we do. I might be a big bank basher, so I'm going to put like the more global bank there, but certainly from a regional and a community bank and credit union perspective, we actually look to partner with some of those institutions. So if you're a business and you are passing your invoices that you receive over to your bank and they're in a foreign currency, and you say pay that German exporter 100,000 euros, it's highly likely that the foreign exchange rate that bank is using is not going to be a great one, and typically could be overpaying in the region of about $2,000 or $3,000 for every $100,000
And that's,
that you send to
you know, for some of the small businesses listening right now, you know, conceptually that's probably not even triggering with them because they don't send money over like that. But I think the point of understanding this is that Mark's company, Green Shoots, helps people save money, right? On scale, that's what they do. They help people save money. And one of the reasons I asked Mark to come on the podcast, and I thought it would be great to have him on the podcast, is because Green Shoots, even though Mark isn't new in business, Green Shoots is fairly new. And so, you know, you've got a history in the world of foreign exchange and banking. You've been doing this now for what? How many years?
All in now, it'll be 30 years this year.
Yeah, 30 years. So it's not like you're new in the industry, but you are a new business. Talk to me about the struggle of getting a new business going during the pandemic.
So, man, where to start with that? So, you're absolutely spot on. Like, so we're a new company, right? But the way that we would describe ourselves to anybody who's seriously looking to engage with us is it's a new skin, but the bones are hyper experienced. Like, to your point, you know, almost 30 years. We've been doing this for a very, very long time. So we know what we know, but we also understand that there are many businesses out there that have been doing things a particular way for a very long time, and we're trying to slightly tweak their own way of doing things. They're sort of almost trying to break a habit. But in terms of starting a business during a pandemic, I mean, the amount of times that people have asked us, like, you know, you must be absolutely off your head to try and start something new during probably one of the worst, more recent crises that we've ever seen. And I said, look, you know, that would probably be true if we were looking to start a travel agency in August of last year, right? Of August of 2020. But we started just as the pandemic was unfolding, if you will. Mm-hmm. And given to your point, we are a company that saves businesses money. What better time do you need to save money than during a pandemic?
So I completely agree. And what, in your estimation, has been your biggest challenge getting the ball rolling with the business?
There's a number of challenges. I would see them all as being fairly large. I think in no particular order, trying to get a seasoned CFO or a business owner or a finance director, for example, to just change that habit.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is stuff that they've been doing for years, and all of a sudden you're a new guy on the block. You're saying that there's a new way of doing this that can save you money, but that's a risk when you're talking about big money moving in hands and $100,000 and stuff. They're comfortable eating that cost of $2,000. That's what they're known for. They've got that planned in, and now some guy calls up on the phone and says, "Can I have 5 minutes of your time? Show you a new way to save $2,000 on your international transactions." I imagine you're hearing a lot of dial tone.
Yeah, it gets that way. It does get that way. And
not to mention, you have to contact people in the middle of a pandemic when they're not at the office.
Well, there is that. And also, I think, you know, during the pandemic, people are, pardon the expression, pulling their hair out. And, you know, running in thousands of different directions. And so what they're trying to do at this point in time is literally like plug the holes in the boat. And so that kind of the ability to then find some time, or at least think that they can need to find some time to like step away from that and learn something new. It's just not on somebody's to-do list.
Yeah, it's not on their purview.
Exactly. I kind of appreciate that. And it's funny, like this weekend, I had a kind of an epiphany in the way to try and help communicate a lot more clearly. Was because I was at Home Depot.
No, really? I was at Home Depot too.
I was at Home Depot.
Isn't that what guys do on the weekend? We go to Home Depot.
I just go there and look at stuff. I don't.
It's like our new version of Mantown, isn't it?
I just want to pretend I know what I'm doing. But
you know what I always say, Mark? I need a chaperone at Home Depot so I don't spend all my money there.
That's exactly it. The amount of times I don't think I walk out there with less than $500 worth of stuff, of which $450 I didn't really need, quite frankly. It's just, you just get sucked in. And I've got an 8-year-old who likes to be putting stuff in the carriage as well. So, you know, you end up getting to the end and you're embarrassed to say, yeah, that's not mine. You just buy it. And then, so you end up walking out and say, I might use it at some stage.
So what was your epiphany?
So I'm at the register. I'm getting like towards the register, and as like I've been approached, 100 times when you're checking out is, hey, do you want to save 20% today? Take out a credit card. You can pay it off today, but you'll save 20%. And the thing that races through my mind is I don't have time. I just want to get to the car. I just want to get home. I don't want to go through the ball ache of filling out paperwork. It's going to cost me time and yada, yada, yada. Right. But yesterday I'm thinking, dude, what you've just said is exactly what you hear from a CFO. And me, I've not even given it 2 seconds to think about, well, what is the time going to be spent in filling this out? And how complicated is it going to be in taking out that credit card? And my purchase yesterday was for $500. So we're thinking like, there's $100 just there. You've just given away if you don't do this. So I thought, you know what, you're preaching, so why don't you have a listen to yourself? And so, yeah, sure enough, pull over. Within 4 minutes, I walked out there $100 to the richer. So it just made me think like maybe we need to change the narrative and the way that we communicate to CFOs to make it apparent to them that, you know what, this is a matter of minutes. It's a matter of probably 5 minutes for you to understand and about 2 minutes for you to actually make the change. And off the back of that, you can then carry on going about your regular day-to-day business, and yet you'll be doing it, saving yourself a couple of $1,000 for every $100 grand that you send overseas. And that couple of $1,000 just gets plowed back into the business, right? You can either use that to upgrade your technology, stop Bob from being furloughed in the warehouse, look to hire new employees, pay down your debt, like help you towards your interest payments, whatever it might be.
So isn't this a bigger issue that like, so the interesting analogy that you bring up with I think is really good is it's not, I don't know how close the analogy is to what you deal with every day dealing with the CFO of a company, but at Home Depot, you have to fill out this application. It runs your credit score. Now you open up what's called a trade line on your credit score, and it can negatively affect your credit. So that does not happen with a business, which I know. I refuse to open the credit cards just for the credit score impact at those places, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm offered those things all the time. I mean, it's at the point where you get gas at a 7-Eleven now, and that's exactly what they're offering you is a 7-Eleven credit card or something like that, And so, like, I don't want to impact my credit score. It really doesn't have anything to do with saving the money in that scenario that I'm thinking, but I'm also not the same buyer that everybody else is either. So I think it's most certainly the time issue that you're up against. It's the time issue for why they want to get on the phone. It's the time issue. To me, it's an interesting perspective because I think that this is why one of the things I like to talk about on this podcast is networking and referrals, right? Because the more we network, the more referrals we get. And if we can educate our partners to refer us the right way, we won't have objections that happen when we have to deal with the people directly. And so the networking partners would be the ones telling others that this is a 5-minute conversation and a 2-minute application.
Right. And so to that point, the epiphany, if you will, which was partially yesterday and also in a recent conversation I had with a prospect, it is making sure that the referring partner or the referral partner does tell that right story. And I don't think that we were necessarily communicating to them the right way to tell the story. And a case in point would be like somebody like a customs broker or a freight forwarder would be like magical for us. And we've engaged with a few freight forwarders over the last couple of months or so. And invariably the response is, Mark, you know what, we've introduced the concept to like 10, 15 of our clients, and we keep getting, we're getting no interest. And then you have that repeated one after the other, conversation wise with a freight forwarder. And it was just, I was thinking to myself, like, how is that possible? Because almost, from a customs broker perspective, 100% of their clients are either buying or selling internationally. So there's money
Mhm.
movement, even if it's in US dollars, there's
Mhm.
money movement. So there's a need, without a shadow of a doubt, without a shadow of a doubt. So why is that not coming through? And then it dawned, like, it was a conversation I'd had with somebody recently where they just dropped into our conversation what they'd said. Like, Mark, we'd spoken to a company, and yeah, they said they didn't need any, like, didn't have any foreign exchange payment needs because they're importing from Germany and they're paying for those invoices in dollars. And so, we just said, okay, fair enough, and away they went. And it was then I thought, that's probably the same conversation you've had 20 times. That's the same conversation that the other freight forwarders are having as well. Right. Okay. So now what we do is we go back to the referral partners and say, here's the next stage. So here's what you're going to hear. I can almost guarantee you, right? If we lined up 1,000 CFOs right here, right now, 950 of them are paying for invoices in US dollars. So expect to hear exactly that. We don't use foreign currency. We don't need foreign currency. We have no foreign exchange risk. We're paying for invoices in US dollars. Expect to hear that, Mr. or Mrs. Referral Partner.
Mhm.
At which point you then say, well, actually, if you're paying in dollars, you do have foreign exchange risk. You can't see it and you can't manage it. And therefore, you do have a foreign exchange payment need. And by the way, you're overpaying. And these are the reasons
Mhm.
why. And then have them tell the story of, like, what, like, the value that we could bring and why it is that they are. Like, so to be a little bit more, I want to say maybe aggressive is probably not the
Well, I
right
think no,
right
I
way.
don't know if aggressive is the right word on that. I think it's probably. I agree with you. It's probably stronger than the word you really want. I think it's just educational, right? It's just, and so the other issue with this is being a small business is the time it takes, right? Obviously, we're impatient people. We need sales. We need
Yeah.
to live and eat and drink pints of beer and things like that us European people do. Um, but the reality is that if things do take time, then
Yeah.
to a degree it's a numbers game, and that time, part of that time process is that educational process. I mean, you're learning about the dialogue so let me step back a second and tell you, we've had other people on the podcast, and some of these people put 10, 20 years in business, um for themselves, and they don't learn the things that you're saying until year 4 or 5, right? You're already
Right.
learning it in year 2, right? And so, like, so you're ahead of the game in that regard. And I think that part of the process of small business growth is about having more at bats, right? Getting up to the plate and swinging. And
Yeah.
in baseball, um, they don't have baseball in the UK. They have cricket, but it's probably similar. But in baseball in the US, if you're hitting 350, you're the rock star. You're an all star.
Absolutely.
You're
Yeah.
you're the king. And so that's 7 hits for every 20 at bats. And so funny enough is in business we don't think of it like that. Like
Right.
we're not. On my old podcast, Square Peg Round Hole podcast, I interviewed a lady. I believe her name was Andrea Waltz. She wrote a book called Go for No, which the whole concept of the book is your number one goal should be to get as many no's as possible, because that means you're closer to yes,
Okay.
right? Conceptually, if you say if I'm a 1 out of 10 person, I'm a 3 out of 10 person, I can get 3 sales or 3 conversations out of 10, 10 tries, then go for the 7. Because the minute you get the 7 out of the way, you're probably going to get the next 3 right after that.
Yeah. So the only, not to say that there's a flaw to that theory, other than if you're doing it wrong 10 times, if your communication is not right 10 times, then you're going to get 10 no's every single time.
And I agree, but it's the 10 times you do it, and the next 10 times you do it, and the next 10 times you do it. Now you've got 30 no's, and it's at that point you're going to have the realization that the conversation's wrong, and it's about having
Right.
the number of conversations. So when I talk about referrals, I talk about it as showing up. I talk about it as consistently having these one-to-ones, to constantly be talking to the same people 3 or 4 times a year, in 15, 20, 30-minute phone calls. And it is about the repetition of all of it that
Yeah.
produces, because what happens is, and I learned this from actually the speaking industry, Mark, surprisingly enough, is they always teach us to record everything we say, because
Okay.
randomly off the cuff you're going to say something and it is going to be pure gold, and you're going to not have recorded it, and you won't know to go back and put it in. I was also taught that we write speeches not for what we're going to say, but for what we don't want to say. It keeps
Right.
us within the guardrails of the road, right? And so,
Mm.
interestingly enough, I think too often business owners, we think we get all up in our head about what we're supposed to be talking about the conversation, versus just letting the conversation flow. And
Right.
when I owned my web agency, in the back half of owning that, I learned much more quickly how to just sell websites. Was really just about having a conversation about sales, not websites. And it was so bizarre
Right.
because I just randomly ended up on that stuff. So, as a small business owner, how are you continuing to educate yourself now?
Well, it, I think there's a number of ways. What we know and what we've learned about global payments over the last 30 years, one could argue that if you come into this gig in the last 12 months, then you could be pretty much up the curve as somebody who's been in it for a long time, right? Because what I've known, or what was relevant 15, 20 years ago, is completely obsolete in terms of the way that maybe money moves, the way that banks' behaviors are with each other and with the technology. So I try and keep up with, there's a number of different industry papers that I read. There's a number of different blogs that I follow, just to keep current with regards to what's out there from a technology perspective. So that's kind of like really the key for me. But then also just like having a certain sense of self-reflection. So to your point earlier on about having those, or just now about those 30 conversations, yeah, after like 10, if we're not having any success, then we're thinking, okay, maybe we need to change the narrative. And just because you might even have, some success with certain conversations and the way that you position the products and the services, that might also need to change as well at some stage. Just because it works today doesn't mean to say it's going to work tomorrow. So I think from an educational perspective, it's just the experience that I have in sales and relationship management at least tells me that nothing's consistent and there isn't a
Yeah.
constant.
Yeah,
And
and
so
are you
learn
educating
that.
yourself around other small business growth activities, things like sales podcasts, things like mastermind groups or other people networking
Yeah,
groups,
so
things like that?
I belong to a couple of networking groups, and to be honest, it's actually less for referral activity and more to understand what are you going through in terms of building your business. What are some of the pitfalls that you have? Because it could be that even though we're in completely different industries, the issues are the same.
They're always the same.
Yeah,
The growth issues are always the same with small business owners,
yeah,
regardless of the type of industry that we're in. We see
yeah.
it all the
Well,
time. I mean, when I interviewed 50 people for my new book, I saw this pattern across all types of industries. There's
right.
always like people don't trust their gut. Early on, they don't trust their gut.
Yeah,
We all need new clients. And so when a client presents themselves as a client and you get that weird feeling, you see the red flags, they're not a good fit, but yet you still take them on because we need the money. And then eventually it crashes and burns. And usually it's the business owner holding, the responsibility from that. And I see it over and over and over again. In the book, I
yeah,
talk about how we got to get to the level of security to the point where we have a predictable amount of income coming in every month so that we can push away these clients.
yeah, yeah. Well, we at this point in time, I feel maybe we can be still that little bit. I don't want to say choosy, but
Selective.
this, Yeah, I mean, look, there's still going to be. We're a financial services company, right? So we still have to adhere to rules and regulations laid down by governance here in the US. So we can't just take on any client in any industry.
Mhm.
And then so there's that, and that's no different from the way that a bank would operate anyway, right? So we adhere to
Mhm.
the same kind of levels of know your customer, anti-money laundering laws and rules and regulations. But at the same time, there's a risk, there's a credit component that we have to bear in mind because we are allowing clients to trade foreign exchange against a limit that we are comfortable with.
Mm.
And so we are absorbing a certain amount of risk,
Mm.
meaning that if the client decides that they don't want to settle the transaction, that trade has to be unwound. And I think only once in my history have I ever seen that turn into a profit. Usually there's a loss on the other side of that, particularly if it's done in a very quick period of time. So we don't want to be like, we don't necessarily want to take somebody on who, like, if that issue, like that thought is in my gut that
Mhm.
this is not right. If it looks and smells like poo, it probably is poo, as they say, right?
That's right.
So, don't necessarily take somebody on just to, because that one bad apple could really ruin your profits for the entire year. With that being said,
Absolutely.
we are we we're in the thirds of our careers, so we're not necessarily in this to become millionaires. We're not in this to we don't need to get onto the housing property like ladder. We're not interested in flashy cars.
Mhm.
We're not a charity, so we've got bills to pay and we've got school fees to pay. But we're really here to provide that level of education and support any business. And we know there are a lot of businesses out there that might have access to foreign exchange payments, might be doing best practices, but are getting really crappy pricing because their flow is too low,
Mm.
or they're not considered to be big enough and therefore profitable enough. So one of our smaller clients would be sending like £1,000 to the UK once every couple of months.
Mhm.
Another that we're chatting to right now, we're looking at structuring a $50 million trade.
Mhm.
So, and we'll touch anything in between. Now, that being said, again, do we only want clients that are going to be sending £1,000 every few months? Oh, honestly, no. But we can afford to do that because we know that we can, from an aggregated revenue
Yeah.
perspective.
I refer to that as the less than ideal client. It's an they probably have a good makeup, but the transaction volume isn't there. And
Yeah,
a lot of times it in my new book you can plot your clients into the ideal client matrix and determine where they all sit. And so
yeah.
that was probably something I would consider to be an adequate client. It just depends on how the relationship is, or is it transaction driven. But
Yeah, I mean, look, I can easily say what a great client would look for us. It's somebody that would trade $100 million on a weekly basis, but we know that those types of client, those big wows, are not out there. And again, I'm coming back to the fact one of the reasons why we
But
created the
let
company.
me just challenge you on that, because is your ideal client that, because it's just volume based, then you just don't care about the relationship, you want the transaction, and
We
that's
care
it,
about the
because that could
relationship.
go sour on you, right? And so
It
that
could
to
do.
me, I know you, and I know that you're a relationship driven guy. So
Oh, it's
I think the whales are great, but in my book I talk about them as being a blip in the blip zone. They give you a big blip on your profit and loss statement, and then they don't. Sometimes I interviewed one guy in the book, and he talked about how the best clients weren't even the most profitable ones. They don't send a ton of business, but they're fun to do business with. They're good people to hang out with, that type of thing. So
well, it depends on what your definition is. What are you trying to get out of when you say what's your ideal? Like my ideal client for socializing is going to be somebody who likes to have a drink. My ideal client for providing me the best value of revenue is somebody who trades $100 million a week.
it's
My ideal
interesting that
client,
you have different categories for that, because
well, I mean, yeah, but you could. Why
yeah,
wouldn't you? Like, so it's
I
subjective.
I
It's
don't.
so subjective.
I just have a single ideal client. Yeah.
But how do you
It's the
fit?
person
How do
that
you?
brings me joy.
Right. Okay. So I like that because the joy is going to come from having a nice conversation, helping them out, and also providing
That's
a
why
level of
in the
income.
client matrix, there's a whole thing. But see, you walked right into that. I didn't even put you up to it. Listen, we're almost out of time. I got a couple more questions for you. Hopefully, you can be really super succinct with them. What's the
Probably
number
not.
one piece of software that you could give as a tip for other business owners? I'm not talking about like foreign exchange software, but I'm talking about business software. What tool do you use that you could share with other people that could be a game changer in their small business?
I'd say a solid CRM.
Ah,
So I don't know if we're allowed to name or advertise, but
name it. Go ahead.
so there's a few that we've tried and tested, and there's a few that I've used in the 7 banks over 28 years, in my career. But I'm a big fan of HubSpot right now.
Yeah, I use HubSpot.
I like them. I like. So we had Salesforce for a while,
Mhm.
and what I like about Salesforce is their the pipeline management tool and the way that it's customizable. And it's very intuitive, and it's also a nice, easy to read dashboard. HubSpot for me is just a little bit behind the curve there, but what I like most about HubSpot is the communications, the ease of communications, like sending out newsletters and having our brand in those communications. With Salesforce, it was a little bit of you could get there, but it was a by hook by crook process, and it just wasn't intuitive, and I didn't like that.
What's the one business book you would recommend that other people read?
I actually have a couple, and I know that I'm supposed to be doing it quickly, but a good friend of mine, Dr. Dennis Ribello, Story Like You Mean It, and also I do like Don Miller.
Oh,
Story brand. Yeah, and I like this one because particularly because I have the attention span of a gnat, and I've got hundreds, no, that's a bit of an exaggeration. I've got hundreds of books that I haven't read, but I've got scores of self-help books that I haven't read, whether that's how to be a better father, better husband, better woodworker, whatever it might be. And you could sell them for new. The spines are not even cracked. But when this one landed on my desk as a recommendation from a buddy of mine.
This one being the Don Miller Story Brand book.
Don Miller, yeah, I'm sorry. The Building a Story Brand. I kind of sat back in my chair with the notion that I'll read the first page, and then within like 20 minutes, I'd busted through the first couple of chapters, and a lot of what he was saying resonated with me. And then with Dennis, I gave that a read because I trust the guy and because I want to help the guy out. And it again really talks to those that want to tell their story in a very succinct manner. Such that the audience, whether somebody asks you at a cocktail party, like, what do you do for a living, that you're just not absolutely boring the pants off of them, talking about your company that you inherited from your grandfather who started it during like a depression era, yada, yada, yada. You've already turned somebody off. So using as fewer words as possible to maximize the story that you have.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, I think the insight here is that you need to be able to read both these two books so that you can effectively explain to your father exactly what you do. And that brings it full circle. Mark, thanks for joining me today. I know it's not likely, but if there happens to be a freight forwarder or somebody that needs foreign exchange, how can they get in touch with you?
In a number of ways. So directly via email, mark.ridley@greenshootsfx.com. Our website, GreenShootsFX.com, has some contact info as well as a ton of regular info. And we're also available on Twitter, and we try and put a lot of content out over LinkedIn as well. So follow us on LinkedIn, and we can get you on our marketing communications as well.
Yeah, because I'm sure that's where everybody wants to be, is on everybody else's email address and email list. But speaking of email lists, we're going to find a way for you folks to subscribe. Make sure you subscribe on all those favorite podcast apps that you belong to, and smash that like button and subscribe button on YouTube if you're enjoying this show. We greatly appreciate it. As I always like to say, don't forget to live happy, smile a lot, and high five everyone around you.
I'm waking up this morning, gonna grab myself a smile.
Thank you for listening to the Mass Business Podcast, where we focus on growing a small business and understanding networking and referrals. Don't forget to like on your favorite platform and share out this podcast. This show has been produced by Heather Grant, music by Celtic Kelly, all rights reserved. I'm your host, professional speaker, author, and word-of-mouth referral consultant, Matt Ward. Don't forget to live happy, smile a lot, and high five everyone around you.
Feeling alright. High five the world. Yeah, yeah, yeah. High five the world. Make a difference today. High five the world. What a thing to say. Do you feel what I'm telling you?